I am Emily Harper, 29, living in Chicago. I was 4 days away from my wedding when I found a letter from my parents that made my world come crashing down. The wedding is canceled. Please wait for our attorney to contact me. The matter has been resolved. Those few cold words were like a sharp knife stabbing into my heart. For years, I had tried to live in a precarious position between pleasing my parents, who always wanted to control my every decision, and building a home with the man I loved, Nathan. But this time, they had crossed an unacceptable line. The wedding they insisted on organizing had now become the noose they used to tie me down. I stood frozen in the middle of our small house in suburban Illinois, clutching the letter as if to suffocate the pain rising in my chest, a swirl of helplessness and determination. Little did I know that in just 72 hours, things would change in a way that I could not have foreseen. Before I begin this story, please leave a comment telling me where you are reading this. And if you have ever been torn between love and family pressure, don't forget to like and follow for more true stories. I was the only child of James and Catherine Harper, raised in a wealthy, traditional Chicago family. My father headed a prominent real estate investment fund, and my mother coordinated key relationships with the city's elite. From an early age, I was taught that my life should follow a certain path. Go to a prestigious university, build a career in finance or law, and eventually marry a man of right standing, meaning someone with a prestigious family background and a bank account that would impress at any cocktail party. I met that expectation to some extent when I got into Northwestern University, but my heart belonged to another world, the world of art, specifically graphic design, not the numbers and legal terms my parents expected. Immediately after graduation, I shocked them by turning down a prestigious position in my father's company to join a small creative design studio in the city center. For the next 7 years, I worked hard to pursue my own path, building a name for myself through artistic projects that were deeply personal. Gradually, my parents were forced to accept my choice, especially when success began to knock on their door. But deep in their eyes, there was always a persistent belief that it was all just a temporary phase, a rebellion that would end when I settled down into a marriage that fit their mold. My parents had long envisioned the man who would become my husband, a Chicago socialite, preferably with an MBA from a prestigious school like Northwestern or Chicago Booth, working in finance or law, and from a family of sufficient status to be mentioned at cocktail parties at the golf club. So when I introduced Nathan Bennett 2 years ago, backups. He immediately failed the invisible test. I met Nathan at a charity fundraiser to support arts programs for public school students in disadvantaged areas of Chicago. I was there as a sponsor, and Nathan was being recognized for his outstanding work as a high school art teacher. He had initiated a unique project that connected students with local artists, opening them up to a world of creative expression. When Nathan took the stage to accept his award, I was drawn to the passion and sincerity in his eyes. In his speech, he talked about how art changed his life as a confused teenager and his desire to give back to the next generation. At the reception afterward, I initiated conversation, and we talked for hours. Nathan grew up in a middle-class family in suburban Milwaukee, his father an electrician, his mother a social worker. He earned a scholarship to college and later earned a master's degree in art education, despite taking out loans to pay for it. He was not flashy or flashy, but there was a warmth, intelligence, and passion about him that was uncanny. My first date with Nathan was a far cry from the formal dinners I'd had with men my parents had chosen. He took me to a Chicago community art gallery that featured the soulful work of his students in an independent art project. Afterwards, we dined at a cozy little diner run by a local family, where Nathan happily referred to the owner as an old friend. For the first time, I felt free to breathe, to be myself without having to conform my words or actions to preconceived stereotypes. Over the next few months, our relationship deepened in a gentle, steady way. Despite our different backgrounds, we found common ground in core values: honesty, dedication, and a passion for being ourselves. 7 months ago, during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan, Nathan got down on one knee and proposed with a simple but meaningful ring, an heirloom from his beloved grandmother. I nodded in agreement without hesitation, but when I called my parents to share the good news, their response was icy indifference. "That's great, honey. my mother said. Her voice strained and a long silence stretched the air. We should have an early dinner to discuss the wedding. Dinner with my parents quickly devolved into a heated discussion about our wedding. My parents insisted that it be a grand affair at the Palmer House, Chicago's most historic and luxurious hotel. It's a Harper tradition, my father said, as if invoking some sacred law that could not be broken. They demanded a minimum guest list of 350, a renowned orchestra, and the most luxurious wedding catering in the city. When I gently suggested a smaller, intimate ceremony that would be personal to Nathan and me, they looked almost shocked, as if I had just suggested getting married in their backyard. What will people think? My mother exclaimed, her eyes wide with worry. The Mitchells invited 500 people last year. Nathan, still trying to keep his cool, offered a middle ground. The important thing is that Emily is happy on her special day, he said, his voice sincere. We can find a balance. But in the weeks that followed, I was torn between my desire to have a wedding that reflected my true self and the pressure of my parents' exacting expectations. I won some small victories, like choosing the minimalist wedding dress I loved instead of the extravagant one my mother had been dying to wear, or adding a small buffet to the main menu. But I also had to make some concessions. The guest list gradually swelled to 300 people, mostly business associates and strangers from social events I'd never met. Nathan tried to stay upbeat, but I could feel the exhaustion creeping in as the budget grew into an unreasonable amount. One night, after my parents insisted on hiring a photographer who had shot for Vanity Fair, Nathan turned to me and asked, "Are you sure this is what you really want?" I sighed and replied with all sincerity, "I want to marry you, Nathan, and I want my parents to support our relationship. I thought if I gave in to the wedding, they would gradually accept you." Looking back, I realized how naive I was. I thought a lavish ceremony would please them, but the truth was that it was never about the lavishness of the party. It was about their deep-seated belief that Nathan was not worthy of me. No matter how many flowers were spread around or how fine wine was served, their prejudices remained unshaken. As the wedding day approached, what should have been a joyous time turned into a suffocatingly heavy one. Every time I met with my mother to discuss wedding plans quickly turned into a subtle censorship session, where she made derogatory comments about Nathan's family. "Do his parents know how to use cutlery properly at a fancy dinner?" she asked, not bothering to hide her sarcasm. "Perhaps we should prepare a few instructions for some special guests." My father was not so evasive. During a menu tasting at a restaurant, while Nathan was chatting amiably with the waiter, he pulled me aside and whispered meaningfully, "It's not too late to change, Emily. Ethan Caldwell asked about me recently. His company just signed a big deal with an investment bank. He's a much better guy." Tensions came to a head at a dinner at my parents' house 3 months before the wedding. My mother invited Nathan's parents under the pretext of getting to know each other, but really to test the waters. Linda and Thomas Bennett were warm, kind people who raised 2 children on the modest incomes of Thomas, an auto mechanic, and Linda, a librarian. They didn't have club memberships or flashy business cards, but they had a family ethos that money couldn't buy. Still, throughout dinner, my parents dropped hints about class differences, as if reading from a prepared script. "We've been members of the Lakeshore Club for 3 generations, my father said casually. "Where do you play golf, Thomas?" Nathan's father smiled politely. "Between auto repair and volunteering for the junior varsity baseball team, I'm afraid I haven't had time for golf." My mother immediately interjected, her voice slightly haughty. "Our wedding venue was featured in Chicago Luxury Magazine. We've had a few big events there. It's probably a little different from the places you two usually go." I saw that Nathan remained calm, responding to each word in a measured and tactful manner. His parents also maintained their polite demeanor, but their eyes gradually revealed embarrassment and hurt. As for me, with each passing minute, the anger in my heart rose like a tide. Each word, each look like a deep cut into the disappointment that was increasingly difficult to hide. As soon as the Bennetts left, I couldn't contain myself any longer. The pent-up emotions from dinner exploded into accusations. "Why did you do that? Nathan's family is a nice family, and you treated them like they didn't deserve to sit at the table." My mother replied, her voice light but her eyes showing her surprise at my outburst. "We were very polite, Emily, but you need to understand that they don't belong in our world. Any future meetings will be awkward socializing. Do you really want to live with that for decades to come?" I shook with anger, my heart constricting in my chest. "I just want to marry the man I love and have my family's blessing. Nathan is nice, smart, and makes me feel more like myself than I've ever felt before. And that's not enough?" My father straightened, his expression cold, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "Marriage is more than just a feeling, Emily. It's a strategy, a way to build the right relationships and protect our way of life. Did Nathan mention a prenup?" I was stunned, feeling as if I'd been doused with cold water. "A prenup? We've never discussed it, and frankly, we don't need it." My father interrupted, his voice firm. "That's unacceptable. No one in this family gets married without some clear asset protection. I'll have a lawyer draw up a contract tomorrow. That's the rule, and I'm not going to budge." I looked him straight in the eye, my voice clear and unwavering. "No, Dad. You have no right to ask Nathan to sign any contract. That would be like saying you don't trust him. And I do." My parents exchanged a knowing glance, as if they'd anticipated my reaction. "Well then," my father said, his voice cold as steel, "perhaps we should reconsider financing this wedding." I blurted out a reply I hadn't expected to utter so decisively. "Fine. Nathan and I will pay for everything ourselves. We'll scale it to suit our means." The words cut through the tension. The room fell into a heavy silence. After a while, my mother spoke, her voice softer but still firm. "Don't make a hasty decision, Emily. Stick to the original plan. But this isn't over yet." They reluctantly agreed to continue, but the air between us had cooled, like a rift had begun to grow irreversibly. That evening, as I confided my frustration to Nathan on the phone, he suddenly suggested an idea that had crossed my mind but never been put into words. "We could elope, Emily," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Fly to a quiet beach in Florida, just the two of us and a few close friends to witness. No arguments, no drama, no one intruding on our lives." The idea appealed as a sweet escape. Simple, free, and unencumbered, but deep down, I had always dreamed of a wedding where my parents were present, where I wouldn't have to choose between the person I loved and my biological family. I sighed and said softly, "I always imagined my parents there, Nathan. I just believed that if they had a chance to know you better, they would change." Nathan hesitated, then spoke in a warm, reassuring voice. "Then we'll do it your way. But remember, the most important thing isn't the ceremony. It's the life we're building together. Everything else will fall into place." Despite my traditional wedding plans, I began to sense something was off about my parents' behavior. They would often converse, whisper something, then suddenly fall silent whenever I entered the room. Twice, I overheard the word checking up in a conversation behind a half-closed door, and a chill ran down my spine. "Are you investigating Nathan?" I asked bluntly one evening, my voice filled with suspicion. My dad frowned, his eyes hard, and his voice was vague. "Don't read too much into it, Emily. We just want to make sure everything is in order for the wedding." I didn't believe him, but with my wedding day just around the corner, I chose to focus on the final details, rather than fight a battle I wasn't sure I could win. Looking back, that was a mistake. I was naive to think that my determination would earn my parents' acceptance and respect for my decision. I didn't realize how far they would go to control my life. With just a few days to go until the wedding, I returned to my parents' house in Chicago for a final check of my dress. The alterations were completed earlier than expected, a relief from the long days of stress and family pressure. As I entered the house where I was staying to prepare for the big day, I heard whispering coming from my father's study. Thinking it was the wedding planner coming to discuss details, I approached the half-open door. "Is there anything else we need?" My father's voice rang out, deep and cold. An unfamiliar male voice responded. His finances are mostly student loans, which is common for teachers. But there are some details about his relationships that are unclear, depending on how you look at them. My mother spoke up, her voice tense. "But there are overlaps, and that's something that can't be ignored. My heart clenched. I pushed the door open, my heart pounding in my chest. In front of me, my parents were sitting across from a man in a black suit with a thick file and several photos in front of him. "What's going on here?" I asked, though I was already feeling a little scared. The man quickly packed up the papers while my parents looked at each other in confusion. My father quickly stood up, signaling the man to leave. When there were only 3 people left in the room, he spoke up. "Emily, you need to understand. We just want to protect you. As parents, it is necessary to find out as much as possible about the person you are about to marry." "You hired a detective?" I exclaimed, the feeling of betrayal hitting me like a cold wave. "Why did you invade Nathan and my privacy like that?" My mother stepped closer, her voice soft but full of intention. "Honey, this is normal in families like ours. Aunt Margaret also hired someone to check your father's background before the engagement." "This is the 21st century, Mom." I almost burst into tears. "I am an adult. I have the right to decide my own life." My dad turned stern. "The problem is that you're making an uninformed decision. Nathan Bennett is not who you think he is." "What do you mean?" I asked, clenching my fists to steady myself. "First of all, he's in a lot of debt," my dad said. I laughed, unable to hide my sarcasm. "You mean student loans? Nathan told me a long time ago. We had a frank discussion about finances, which you and I never did." "That's not all," my mom interjected, her voice sweet but sharp. "He was still seeing another woman when we first met." The words stabbed me in the chest. "No way. If he was, he would have told you." My dad didn't answer, just silently handed me a photo. In it, Nathan was hugging a brunette, the two of them smiling brightly at each other. "This photo was taken a month after your first date. Her name is Claire Evans. They dated for almost a year before you came along." I stared at the photo, my mind reeling. Nathan had mentioned Claire, an ex, but he'd made it clear they'd broken up long before we met. "That's not all," my mother continued, her voice soothing but her eyes triumphant. "They were at his friend's birthday party together, around the time you and Nathan were dating." She showed another photo, Nathan in a suit standing next to Claire at a party, the pale yellow light reflecting off their faces. The timestamp showed it was taken just a few weeks after our first date. I left my parents' house right after that conversation, carrying the photos tucked away in my bag like a heavy secret, dragging with me. I didn't rush to confront Nathan. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the streets of Chicago, streets that had once felt familiar but now felt foreign, as if the city were reflecting my own turmoil. Nathan had always been straightforward and honest. That's what had drawn me to him when we first met. But now the images of him in those photos overlapped with everything I'd ever believed. The evidence was too clear, too vivid, to ignore or reassure myself any longer. When Nathan arrived at my apartment that evening, I didn't say a word. I simply set the stack of photos down on the coffee table. The paper hitting the wood was a soft yet heavy pronouncement of judgment. Nathan was stunned. His face paled as soon as his eyes fell on the photos. "Where did you get them?" he asked, his voice choked with worry, though he tried to keep his composure. "My parents hired a private investigator," I said, my voice so distant and cold that it made me shiver. The pent-up emotion finally coming out. "They showed them to me today. You told me Claire and I had broken up before we met." Nathan sank down on the sofa, running his hands through his hair, his eyes lost in genuine confusion. "Emily, it's not what you think. Technically, Claire and I were still in touch when I met you, but that relationship died a long time ago. We've been on the rocks for a year." "So you were dating both of us at the same time?" I asked, my chest tightening, a dull ache of nausea rising in my throat. "No, not really," he denied hastily. "There was a little bit of a time lag, but you didn't cheat on me. That fundraiser, when I met you, I knew something was different. A week later, I officially ended things with Claire." "So why did you show up at her birthday party a few weeks after our first date?" My voice was hoarse, the words falling into pieces in the silence between us. Nathan bowed his head. His eyes filled with regret as if he were burdened with a heavy mistake. It was a party for a close friend from college. I accepted long ago. Claire came along as a friend just to avoid any awkward situations. I should have told you. But when our relationship started getting serious, I thought it was no longer important. Honestly, I was afraid you would misunderstand. Like now. I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to believe him right away. Everything he said made sense, and the timeline matched what I remembered of our early days. We weren't a real couple then, only 2 dates before those photos were taken. But part of me still felt like I'd been stabbed in the back. "Nathan, you should have told me," I said softly, my voice hoarse and tight. "Finding out from your parents made me feel like you were hiding something worse than the truth." He nodded, his face unable to hide his remorse. "I know. I was wrong to not be honest with you from the beginning. But Emily, I swear there was no betrayal between us. Since our 3rd date, Claire was history. And you were now the only one in my heart. And from that moment on, I loved you." I looked at him for a long time. The words should have made me feel relieved, but instead they left a smoldering rift inside me. "I need time to think. I trust you, but I still feel hurt by your insincerity. Tonight, I want to be alone." Nathan nodded, disappointment clear on his face. "I understand. Just know that I love you, and from now on there will be no more secrets. Your parents are just trying to find a reason to break us up because of what happened 2 years ago, before we even really started. Please, don't let them win." As he left the apartment, I called Sarah, my longtime friend, and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. I needed a place that wasn't Nathan's, or my parents', a place of solitude to get my bearings. Sarah opened the door with warm arms. No questions asked, no reproaches. "Whatever you choose, I'm here," she whispered. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with missed calls and voicemails from my parents. One text from my mother sent a chill down my spine. "It's not too late to back out, Emily. Everyone will understand. We can say we're not compatible." I didn't listen, nor did I call back. I needed a long enough silence to hear myself more clearly. I thought about Nathan, about our 2 years together. He had never made me doubt my love or my devotion. He had silently endured my parents' estrangement, silently supported every step of my design dreams, and never once let go, even in the most difficult times. I wondered if all of that could be erased by something that had never been said in the first place. By the 3rd day, I had my answer. I chose to believe Nathan. His explanation made sense, and while I wish he had shared it sooner, I understood why he chose to remain silent. We were never a perfect couple to begin with. That's what made our love so real and lasting, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even my parents, ruin that. 4 days before the wedding, with renewed faith in my love for Nathan, I returned to my parents' house in the Chicago suburbs to pick up the things I needed for the big day and the upcoming honeymoon. I was prepared for a tense confrontation, ready to defend my faith, ready to talk about forgiveness and choice. But the house was eerily quiet. "Dad? Mom?" I called out, hoping for some response from the kitchen or the living room. But all that came was the sound of wind rustling the curtains. Their car was no longer parked in the driveway. On the foyer table, next to a vase of freshly cut tulips from the garden, was a white envelope with my name written in my mother's familiar, soft handwriting. Inside was a simple, brutally brief note. "Wedding canceled. Expect a call from our lawyer. Everything is settled." My heart stopped in mid-beat. My first instinct was to deny it was true. Surely this was just a last-ditch psychological attack, a desperate ploy by my parents to make me reconsider. My hands shook as I dialed Nathan's number. They left a note saying the wedding was off," I said, fighting back tears, but my voice betrayed the panic. "They mentioned the lawyer and said it was all taken care of. Do you know anything?" "No," Nathan said, his voice strained and tight. "What do they mean? Have you tried calling them back?" "Yes, but it went straight to voicemail," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. Over the next hour, the horrifying truth slowly emerged. I called the wedding planner, hoping for some kind of confirmation that everything was okay. Emily, I was going to call you today, she said hesitantly. Your dad called yesterday and canceled everything. He said a family emergency had forced the wedding to be postponed indefinitely. He also paid the full cancellation fee. He did what? I burst out, almost screaming into the phone. He had no right to do that. It was my wedding. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice heavy, but he's the one who signed the contract and put down the deposit. My heart pounded as I called vendors, catering, florists, photographers, and each one confirmed the same thing. My parents had called one by one, canceling each service individually as if unraveling the puzzle piece by piece of a dream I had worked so hard to build. But the final blow came from the venue manager at Palmer House. Not only did your father cancel, she said, her voice strained and apologetic, but he also warned us that if we tried to contact you directly to reschedule the event, his law firm would get involved. With your family's influence, we couldn't take the risk. I sat down on the steps in the middle of the hall, my arms hanging limply at my sides. In that moment, I was no longer a bride-to-be, but a child stripped of all control over my life. My parents had not just withdrawn their support. They had deliberately destroyed my happy day with their power and money. This was no longer just a protest. This was a calculated, deliberate, and cruel act. Nathan arrived at my parents' house 20 minutes later, his face a mixture of confusion and suppressed anger. I showed him the letter and told him what I'd discovered. I expected him to react violently, perhaps even suggest legal action in response to my parents' actions. Instead, he just sat down next to me on the steps and squeezed my hand affectionately. Emily, I'm so sorry you're going through this, he said, his voice warm, slow, but firm. But listen, this doesn't change anything between us. We still have each other. We're still going to get married, even if it's not the way we originally planned it or with hundreds of guests. We'll find another way. His steadiness in the midst of the chaos gave me unexpected strength. I won't let them dictate my life anymore, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I don't want to argue about the money they spent. They expect me to beg, to give in, but this is our wedding. Our lives. If they choose not to be there, that's their decision. Nathan helped me pack everything. My wedding dress, my honeymoon suitcase, and the personal belongings I didn't want to leave behind. As we carried our things to the car, I paused and looked back at the house where I had grown up. A wave of loss rose in my chest, but underneath was a strange sense of relief. For the first time, I was choosing a path that didn't require my parents' approval. We drove to Nathan's apartment in Chicago, the place that would soon become our new home. When I got home, the emotional pressure of the day poured through a broken door. I collapsed onto the sofa and cried. Not silent tears, but heavy, heart-wrenching sobs. Nathan held me. Not empty words of comfort. Not trying to stop the tears. Just stroking my hair, whispering, "Go ahead and cry. Let it all out. I'm here. We'll get through this together." When the emotions had subsided and my eyes were puffy, I looked up at him and whispered, "So, what do we do about the wedding? It's all canceled. Everyone thinks it's not happening anymore." Before Nathan could answer, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Emily, what's going on? Your mom just called and said the wedding is off because you found out something terrible about Nathan. She didn't say anything, just hinted that he was unfaithful or something. It was vague. I didn't believe it, but I had to ask if you were okay." I told her the whole story, the ridiculous investigation by my parents, the cancellation of the entire wedding. "They're such manipulators," Sarah said, her voice both angry and sympathetic. "Look, don't let them win. I'll call everyone on your guest list. Nathan can contact his side. Tell everyone there's a family rift, but the wedding is still on. Just find a new location." When I hung up, Nathan looked at me questioningly. "You still want to get married this weekend?" I thought for a moment before nodding firmly. Yes. Not because I'm impatient, but because I refuse to let them continue to control our lives. It won't be as glamorous as planned, but maybe that's better. A wedding that's truly ours. Nathan smiled, relieved. I like that idea. I never felt comfortable with the extravagant ceremony. I thought if I did what they wanted and you were happy, they would accept me. But I was wrong. That evening, we called friends, briefly explaining the situation without going into painful details, and frantically searched for an alternative location. Nathan's mother suggested holding the wedding in her Milwaukee backyard, a simple yet family-friendly setting. Several close friends volunteered to provide food, decorations, and music. By midnight, exhausted, we had sketched out a new plan. It would be less glamorous than my parents had wanted, but filled with love and support from people who truly cared about us. As I lay in bed, I felt a strange mix of pain from my parents' betrayal and renewed hope from Nathan's union. Little did I know that over the next 72 hours, everything would change in an unimaginable way. The next morning, while I was making coffee in Nathan's small kitchen, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, but picked it up. "This is Emily Harper." A male voice answered, deep and cold, carrying a professional air of detachment. "Hello, this is Daniel Whitaker of Whitaker & Cole. I represent your parents, James and Catherine Harper. I am calling to discuss the legal issues that have arisen in connection with your current situation." I gripped the phone, my chest burning with rising anger. What legal issues? I am an adult, with full rights to make my own decisions about my life, including marriage. There is nothing to discuss. The lawyer's voice remained uncomfortably calm. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Miss Harper. Your parents have asked me to inform you that they are taking steps to protect the family assets. The trust fund that was set up for you has provisions regarding your marriage that you may not have known about." I frowned. "What provisions? I was never informed." "The trust was set up by my grandparents when I was born, and it is not to be dispersed until I turn 30 or when I get married, whichever comes first." Whitaker hesitated, then said, "There is a provision that gives the trustee, your parents, the right to suspend disbursement if the marriage is deemed unsuitable. Additionally, any money spent on wedding gifts and supplies is considered family property and may be required to be repaid." I nearly screamed into the phone. "That's absurd. They can't manipulate my life like that." Whitaker continued, unperturbed. "We're also finalizing a temporary restraining order, which will keep you from accessing the vacation properties and certain related assets until things are resolved." The conversation dragged on for several more minutes, each one carrying a new layer of pressure, more unreasonable and cold. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not just from anger, but from a feeling of being strangled. Nathan, sensing something was wrong, gently placed his hand on my shoulder and took the phone from me. "What's going on, Emily?" "They want to sever all financial ties to you," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "They're threatening to seize the trust fund, reclaim your wedding gifts, even ban you from the family's properties. They see you as a selfish child, not a grown woman, about to turn 30. Nathan's face darkened. "Emily, I don't want any conflict between you and your family, especially over money. Maybe we should postpone the wedding. Let things cool down." "No," I interrupted, my voice as firm as ever. "That's what they're after. They think if they put enough financial pressure on me, I'll cave. But I don't need their money, Nathan. I just need us." Despite my determination, I knew I couldn't fight this pressure alone. That same morning, I called Rachel Cohen, a family law attorney I'd met through an interior design project. Rachel immediately agreed to meet with me that day. Her office was small and cozy, filled with law books and children's drawings on the walls, a stark contrast to the large legal team my parents had. After hearing the whole story, from the trusts to the threats on assets, Rachel leaned back in her chair, her eyes thoughtful. "They're trying to scare me," she said slowly. "But if your grandparents did set up a trust, the terms usually can't be changed later. Unless there's a clear morals clause, they can't use the unsuitable marriage as an excuse to keep the money." I let out a sigh, a wave of relief rising in my chest. "So they don't have the right to keep the trust?" "Most certainly not," Rachel replied. "As for wedding gifts or purchases, if they were given directly to you, then legally they belong to you, no matter who paid for them. An asset restraining order is just a scare tactic. I'll check it out." Nathan, who had been silent until now, spoke up suddenly. So, what should we do next? Rachel smiled softly. First, stay calm. Next, I'll request all the paperwork, trusts, estates, to verify Emily's rights. And most importantly, live your life. The decision to get married is a legal right. No one can take that away from you, not even your parents. As I walked out of Rachel's office, my phone buzzed with messages. Friends sent me stories of concern. My mother had called, hinting that my upcoming wedding might be canceled because of disturbing revelations about Nathan. I clutched the phone. My voice choked with anger as I told him, "They're trying to turn your friends against you." Fortunately, those close to me, like Sarah, saw through the manipulation and didn't flinch. But a few more distant acquaintances sent polite messages, expressing sympathy for the difficult decision they thought I was facing, wishing me a speedy recovery from this tumultuous time. It hurt. Some people were more likely to believe my parents than to find out the truth from me. But it was in those reactions that I learned who truly cared about me and who was just an extension of the web of images my parents had worked so hard to cultivate over the years. In the midst of the chaos, Nathan's family became an unexpected anchor. When we called to share our situation, they didn't hesitate. "They don't know what they're missing, Emily," Nathan's mother, Linda, said with conviction. "You're welcome in our family as if you were one of our own. No strings attached, no strings attached." His father, Thomas, quickly offered a practical suggestion. "I know a judge in Milwaukee. If you need someone to officiate your wedding in a hurry, he'd be happy to help." His sister Megan called soon after, excited. "I still have all the decorations from my wedding. The lights, the tablecloth, everything. Just tell me and I'll get them." The contrast between my family's cold refusal and the Bennetts' warm, unselfish kindness touched me. Though they had little money, they were willing to share everything: time, support, and most of all, their hearts. Later that day, we began planning a smaller, more intimate wedding. Several vendors, having heard the story firsthand, agreed to continue working, despite the warnings and pressure from the Harpers, especially those who had no business relationship with my parents. By evening, news of the canceled wedding had reached the local press. A reporter called to ask about a high society wedding on hold amid a family feud. I declined to comment, but knowing the story had leaked only added to the confusion and added to the pressure. That night, I sat silently, eyes glued to my phone, reading text messages from friends recounting vague, suggestive calls from my mother. Nathan sat next to me, gently placing his hand on my shoulder. "If you want," he said softly, "we can postpone it. Wait a few months, let things cool down." I looked at him, caught his worried gaze, not because he was afraid for the wedding, but because he was worried about hurting me. It was that look that made me love him all the more. "No." I took his hand, my voice firm. "They want us to break down, to make things so uncomfortable that we give up. But I won't let them win. This weekend, we're getting married. Even if it's just the two of us, a judge and Sarah taking pictures with her phone." Nathan smiled, squeezing my hand. "I support whatever decision you make, but I think you're on the right track. Sometimes it's only when you stand up for yourself that people start to learn to respect you." That night, as we turned off the lights in the apartment that would soon become our first home, I thought quietly about tomorrow. My parents had not contacted me directly, only indirectly through lawyers and friends, as if they were playing a game of chess with me as a sacrificial pawn. I had no idea what they had in store or how far they would go to stop this marriage. But what I did not expect was this. Tomorrow morning, an unexpected person would suddenly appear, an ally I had never thought of, and completely change the course of this confrontation. Just 3 days after finding the chilling letter from my parents, I was sitting at the small dining table in Nathan's cozy apartment, scribbling a list of things to prepare for the modest wedding we were determined to have. The morning light streaming in through the window made everything seem less daunting. Nathan hadn't returned from his coffee run. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, pulling me from my thoughts. My heart sank. Part of me was afraid it might be another lawyer, or worse, my parents with a new play. But when the door opened, I stopped dead in my tracks. Grandma Evelyn was standing there, her silver hair neatly tied back, her navy blue dress as regal as ever. "Grandma," I said, unable to hide my surprise. She lived in New York and rarely came to Chicago unannounced. At 80, she remains remarkably active, a familiar face at charities and major upper-class events. "Hello, dear," she said, her voice steady but powerful, like a classical piece played at the right time. "May I come in? We need to talk." I stepped back, nodding for her to come in while my mind was still sorting through the fragments of surprise. Evelyn had always treated me with a gentleness mixed with a quiet power, a woman who knew how to love and how to awe. I couldn't tell if she was here to support me or to persuade me to listen to my parents. Her eyes swept over Nathan's simple, neat apartment, not judging but seeing something familiar. "So this is where you'll live," she said softly. "Neat, bright, very much like you." I took a deep breath, regaining my composure. "How did you know I was here? Did your parents tell you?" A mischievous smile crossed her face, a rare youthful one I had ever seen. "Your parents don't know," she said. "In fact, if they knew I was here, they would be furious. But I came because I wanted to, not because someone told me to." She sat down on the sofa as if she had been there all along and patted the spot next to her. "Come here, Emily. I think it's time you knew something. Something from our family history." I sat down, my heart pounding. Her hand closed around mine. Strong, firm, carrying a life and untold secrets. "First of all, I want to say that I am deeply disappointed in the way your parents have behaved," she began. "They have betrayed the values I tried to instill in your father. It's a shame." I paused for a moment, then let out a soft breath. "So, you don't agree with them?" "Absolutely not," she said without a trace of hesitation. "But I'm not surprised. Because, Emily, you're not the first person in this family to find yourself in this situation. 60 years ago, I was in your shoes." I was taken aback. In my eyes, she and Grandpa William had always been the ideal couple, a respectable, high society couple. Flawless. "Your grandfather came from a prestigious family, went to a prestigious school, was the right choice in everyone's eyes," she said, her eyes distant. "But he wasn't the first person I loved. Before him, I loved a musician, David, who was an artistic soul, talented but from humble origins in Cleveland. And that made my parents very angry." "And then what happened?" I asked, completely taken in. "They did exactly what your parents are doing now," she continued, her eyes sad. "They threatened to disown me, canceled the engagement, spread rumors that made it impossible for David to stand on any stage. And then I gave in. I left David and a few months later married your grandfather." I looked at her, not daring to ask, but my eyes seemed to beg for the truth. "Do you regret it?" She nodded slightly. "Your grandfather and I had a quiet life, full of respect and sharing. But you know, Emily, true love, the kind that makes you tremble, makes you want to weather any storm with him, I never had that with William. I saw you had that with Nathan, and I didn't want you to give it up, just because of the shadow of old prejudices." Evelyn opened her bag slowly, with a deliberate movement, and withdrew a thick envelope, which she laid on the table with the solemnity of presenting irrefutable evidence. There was an unshakable determination in her eyes, mixed with a mischievousness, as if she were playing a game of chess in which the victory was already certain. "It seems your parents have forgotten who the real founders of the trust they are wielding as a vindictive weapon," she said, her voice calm but sharp as the blade of an apple knife cutting through the skin. I looked at her, my heart jumping slightly in surprise. "I thought that fund was set up by my grandparents in the first place." "That's exactly right." She nodded, her voice even and low. "But I've been co-manager of that trust since your grandfather passed away. And this morning, I sat down with my lawyer and went over every single clause, every single line. The conclusion was clear. Your parents have no legal right to interfere with or prevent you from accessing that money, regardless of who you choose to marry." She pushed the envelope toward me, her eyes never leaving my face. "This is an official letter from my attorney, clearly reaffirming your rights to the trust. And I have also directed that the entire amount be transferred to an account in your name, something that should have been done the day you got engaged. I took the envelope, my palm trembling slightly as if I had just touched a door that opened to a new world. All these days I had lived in fear, weighed down by pressure and doubt. Now, with just a few decisive actions, everything had changed fundamentally. Grandma, I really don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, she smiled, her eyes filled with the gentleness of someone who has been through similar things. But that's not all I did this morning. A glint appeared in her eyes, a rare, mischievous, knowing look that made me feel as if I had just witnessed a meticulously choreographed play. She called the Palmer House administration and a few other vendors. It seems the name Evelyn Harper still carries some weight in Chicago, especially among those who have received scholarships from the educational foundation she has quietly supported over the decades. Just then, the doorbell rang. I stepped out, my heart pounding, and received a sealed envelope from the postman. As I opened it, my eyes scanned the first line. Dear Ms. Harper, we are pleased to confirm that your wedding reservation for this Saturday has been restored as originally planned. I turned back to the living room, looking at her in amazement. You really did all this? A gentle reminder. More like a reminder, she laughed, her voice as light as the beat of the classical music she played. I'm just making it clear that the Harper family is about more than just your parents, and that true influence comes not from calling cards, but from what people build over time. Most importantly, I want them to understand that if you bow to pressure, you will set a bad example for anyone who has ever been threatened with power. And I won't let that happen. Not to you, not to anyone. All morning, my phone buzzed with confirmation messages. Catering, florists, wedding planners, all announcing that previous commitments had been restored. Friends called excited to share that they had just received the official news. The wedding would go ahead as originally planned. Late in the afternoon, when Nathan returned, I took him to see Mrs. Evelyn. She looked him over, her eyes stern and calculating. But then she nodded, her gaze softening, with a touch of affection. Now I understand why Emily chose you, Nathan. You have a sincerity that young people today rarely possess. Nathan, who had heard many anecdotes about her notorious strictness, was momentarily confused, but then smiled with relief. Thank you, Evelyn. Having your support means more to me than anything. Just call me Evelyn, she said, her voice softer. I just want to make sure my granddaughter is free to choose who she loves, as any grown-up deserves. Over a cozy lunch, she told us about her life, the twists and turns she'd taken, the things she regretted not doing differently. It wasn't a rosy story, but an honest account of love and the inevitable frictions in family life. My parents acted the way they did because they were afraid, she said softly, her voice quiet. They were afraid of me straying from what they believed was right, afraid of losing control, and most importantly, afraid of losing their daughter. I looked at her, my heart sinking. Do you think they will ever accept Nathan? Only time will tell, she replied, her eyes as deep as an ancient lake that has never dried. Your parents are stubborn, but they love you, in their own way. When they understand that they cannot manipulate you, they will have to consider whether their pride is worth losing their only child. As the afternoon sun set, Evelyn stood up and adjusted her thin shawl. She smiled mischievously, as if about to reveal a little secret. I've booked a room at the Drake until after the wedding. I suppose I'm still invited? Of course. I jumped up and hugged her tightly, tears falling silently. I still want you to be the one to walk me down the aisle, because Dad won't be there. Her eyes lit up, her voice choked. It would be the greatest honor of my life, Emily. After she left, Nathan and I sat in silence for a long time. Neither of us said anything, just letting the emotions settle in that warm space. Finally, I whispered, as if still in disbelief. I can't believe how quickly things have changed. Just 2 days ago, I thought everything was falling apart. Nathan squeezed my hand. Your grandmother was amazing. Now I understand why you're so strong. You didn't get it from your parents. You got it from her. As we returned to our wedding duties, I thought quietly about all that had happened. What had seemed like a nightmare of parental intervention had turned out to be a priceless gift. Clarity. Clarity about what was truly important and who was truly on our side. The wedding would still happen, just maybe without my parents. And while their absence would break my heart, it would also be evidence of a choice to choose honesty over approval, just like Evelyn wished she had the courage to do 60 years ago. On Saturday morning, the Chicago sky was high, clear, and cool, the kind of weather any photographer could hope for an outdoor wedding. I got ready in a plush suite at the Palmer House, surrounded by Sarah and her bridesmaids. It was both surreal and surreal, a moment of calm after the storm. Hard to believe that just a few days ago, everything had been in chaos. My parents had remained silent, not responding to the news that the wedding was going ahead, nor making any further legal threats. Their absence left a strange aftertaste, both sweet and bitter, but I told myself I wouldn't let it overwhelm my happiness. "You look gorgeous," Sarah said as she adjusted my veil. I had chosen a light, airy wedding dress with delicate lace details, a far cry from the bejeweled ball gown my mother had wanted. "You look exactly like yourself," Sarah smiled. I looked in the mirror and nodded. "I do feel the same way." There was a knock on the door and Evelyn entered, resplendent in her emerald green gown, her eyes sparkling with light and memory. "It's time, my dear," she said, her voice soft but firm. As the music played, she took my hand and led me down the aisle. "You're not losing your family today," she whispered. "You're expanding it." The ceremony was more moving than I could have imagined. In the presence of the guests, fewer than expected but all sincere, I felt a confidence that even I hadn't expected after all I'd been through. Nathan's vow brought tears to my eyes. "Emily," he said, "when I met you, I never thought someone like you would choose me. These past few days have tested us in ways no one could have predicted, but they have only made me more certain that you are the strongest, most determined woman I have ever met. I promise to be there for you through thick and thin, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, and to never forget that together, we can get through anything." My vows, written one sleepless night, came from the deepest place in my heart. "Nathan, I choose you freely and without hesitation. These past few days have taught me that love is not about pleasing others or following a predetermined path. Love is about finding someone who makes you the best version of yourself and building a life together based on true values. I promise to always remember that lesson, face every storm with the courage and sincerity you have shown me, and cherish the privilege of being free to choose my own path in life." As we exchanged rings, my eyes wandered to the empty seats where my parents would have sat. But instead of feeling lonely, I saw Evelyn, watching me with loving eyes. Her presence was a gentle reminder that family is not just about blood, but about unconditional love, presence, and tolerance. The wedding reception at Palmer House was filled with a quiet, deep joy. Not flashy, not showy, but heartfelt. Lacking the elaborate details that my mother had obsessively tended to, the party had a warm simplicity, as if we were inviting close friends home for a meal. Nathan's family quickly settled into the atmosphere, chatting openly with my friends as if they had known each other for a long time. No pressure, no pretense. As she raised her glass, Evelyn stood. She didn't need to tap her glass or raise her voice. The slightest movement made the room quiet in the presence of her gentle, majestic presence. "Marriage is not a social contract, nor a bargain between two families, although many in our class have thought so for generations," she said, her voice calm but deep as a bell. "A true marriage is a union of two souls, a firm choice between people who see in each other not status or fortune, but character, trust, and devotion." Emily and Nathan lived by those values, not only in their love, but in the way they faced adversity. May their marriage remind us that the highest traditions are not models, but the encouragement to be true to ourselves. Her words played like the soundtrack to the party, quiet but powerful. It was both a profound blessing and a gentle but clear message to my parents' rigid beliefs. As the night wore on and the party drew to a close, a waiter approached and handed me an envelope. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother's. Inside was a thin piece of paper containing a cold message. We still believe this marriage is wrong. When you are ready to talk rationally, you know how to contact us. Mom and Dad. No wedding greetings, no tenderness, just silence written in words, sharp as a thin blade. I handed the letter to Nathan. He didn't say anything, just folded it carefully and put it in his pocket, then took my hand. They'll change, or they won't, he said, his voice low and firm. Either way, we'll be fine, Emily. I was surrounded by people who truly wished us well, and in that moment my parents' absence was no longer a haunting void. It was just a fact, painful but no longer controlling. For the first time I understood that I couldn't control their choices, but I could control how I moved forward. With love, with freedom, and with the person I was becoming. The weeks following the wedding were both challenging and unexpected. True to her word, Evelyn made sure that my trust fund was transferred entirely to my name, a gesture that was both a guarantee and a recognition of my autonomy. Nathan and I settled into our new Chicago apartment, slowly getting back to work. Me with my unfinished designs, him with his art education projects. Almost a month later, I received a text message from my father, the first direct contact since the cold letter on our wedding day. Your mom and I want to meet you for lunch next week, just to talk. The meeting was tense and guarded. My parents offered no apologies, no acknowledgement of the hurt they had caused, but I could sense a faint attempt to reopen the door of communication. I didn't shy away, nor did I give in. I love you, but I will not tolerate any disrespect toward Nathan or his family. If you want to be in my life, the minimum requirement is respect for the husband I have chosen. My father, still a negotiator, viewed the conversation as a negotiation. We may not agree with your choice, Emily, but we understand that you have made your decision. Perhaps we should find a way to make things more comfortable. It wasn't an apology, not the hug I had longed for, but it was a start, however fragile. The following months were a slow process of rebuilding. My relationship with my parents improved, little by little. They began to treat Nathan with more civility, though there was still a gap that had yet to be bridged. He responded with courtesy and patience, a quality I both admired and appreciated. The first dinner between our families was a quiet test of patience, with Evelyn acting as a bridge between the reluctant Harpers and the wary Bennets. The turning point came half a year later, when Nathan's art education project received a major grant from a prestigious national organization. His work was also featured prominently in a leading education magazine. Not long after, my father, who rarely gave praise, left a comment that surprised me. He seems to be very dedicated to his students. That's remarkable. It was a seemingly simple statement, but it was the first sign that his perspective was shifting. From judgment to quiet recognition. From prejudice to recognition of true value. The journey to building a healthy relationship with my parents continues. There are still heavy silences, moments when old thoughts creep back in. But I no longer panic about those fluctuations. I have learned to hold my boundaries, not with confrontation, but with gentle firmness. And in the process, I have left the door open for change. Not because I need acceptance, but because I believe everyone deserves a chance to grow up, even if it is late. This journey has transformed me in ways I never imagined. From someone who lived to please others, always struggling between my own desires and my parents' expectations, I have become a woman who knows her own worth and understands that the most valuable choices are those that come from the truth in my heart, not from the eyes of approval from others. Nathan and I have become stronger through all the storms we have overcome. Facing fierce opposition before our wedding day has not only not broken us, but has also strengthened our belief that no challenge is insurmountable when we hold hands. Nathan's patience and steadfastness during that time of crisis has taught me the true nature of a partnership, something no seminar or book can convey. What I didn't expect was to learn to appreciate our family legacy, not the flashy version my parents tried to impose on me, but the deeper values my grandmother Evelyn quietly passed on. Courage, integrity, and the wisdom to recognize what really matters. Looking back, I'm grateful for the crisis that nearly ruined our marriage. Without it, I might never have discovered my inner strength or had the presence of mind to appreciate the people who stayed by my side. I might have continued to chase my parents' approval instead of confidently walking my own path. The letter from my parents, with the cold words, call off the wedding, wait for a call from the lawyer, was written as a tool of pressure and control. But ironically, it became the lever that forced me to break free from the invisible iron chain that had bound me for so many years. The 72 hours from reading the letter until Evelyn's intervention were the most painful of my life, but also the time when everything became clear. Who was with me for true love, and what was non-negotiable. To anyone struggling with the demands of family and the need to be true to yourself, I have this to say. Stay true to what's most important to you. The road may be bumpy, the conflict may hurt, but the freedom to create a life that's true to your values is worth every second you spend standing up for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to hear your experience. Have you ever had to stand up to family pressure to stand up for someone or something you believed in? How did you overcome it, and what changed for you since? Share in the comments. If this story resonates with you, leave a like and follow for more true stories. And remember, sometimes the saddest songs lead to the most beautiful melodies, if only you have the courage to play your own.